In this screencast, we're going to take a look at factors that affect how you study and try and make your study practices as effective as possible. And I'm going to start off by talking about one of the absolute most important things you can do. And we talk about the difference between what's called massed practice versus distributed practice. These are study techniques. Massed practice is where a lot of students will do this. They'll try to cram a whole lot of studying into a short amount of time, but they don't take any breaks whatsoever. So basically, you're studying for a long period of time without a break. That's what massed practice is. Distributed practice is where you space out your study time. So distributed practice might be where you study for 15 to 20 minutes on something, at one point in time, and then you take a break, you come back to it later, you study another 20 minutes, you come back to it again, you study another 20 minutes, but you spread it out over a long time period. So basically, you're talking about short study time periods separated by breaks. And this leads to what we call the spacing effect. Okay, the spacing effect, which comes about because of distributed practice, allows people to remember things more easily, especially if it's like a list of information. But really, it's any time that you have something that you know fairly well, that it's not incredibly difficult. If your materials like vocabulary terms or just something basic, a routine assignment, it's much better to do this in distributed practice than it is massed practice. Distributed practice is also much more effective for physical activities, learning to shoot a free throw or learning to hit a baseball, those kind of things. It's much better to, let's say, take 10 swings or shoot 10 free throws rather than to shoot 100 or hit 100 swings, at a time. So massed practice, um, where you basically spend a long time period looking at the same thing or researching the same thing. About the only time that that's really effective is when you really don't know what you're doing. For example, something very complex, like a physics or a chemistry assignment, when you go home and it takes you an hour to figure out what you're even supposed to do, at that point in time, you've spent an hour already, and now all of a sudden you get it, you figure it out. The last thing that you want to do in that case is to take a break. You do not want to take a break until it becomes rather routine. So if you've spent an hour trying to figure out what to do and you figure it out, now keep at it until it becomes rather routine, and then start spreading out your study again. Okay? Distributed practice works best most of the time. Second thing that you can do is to use mnemonic devices. Teachers try and give you mnemonic devices as often as we can. Things like "My very educated mother just served us nachos." That is a nice, easy way to remember the names of the planets and their relationship to the sun. So that gives it to you. If somebody asked you, what are the 5 Great Lakes? Well, you remember the word homes, Homes. Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. That gives you the 5 Great Lakes. Those kind of mnemonic devices are very quick and very easy for you to remember things. So they make, material just a little bit easier to recall. Um, I will tell you, when you're making up your own mnemonic devices, feel free to be as creative or as funny as you possibly can be, because research actually shows the more bizarre that the mnemonic device, as long as it makes sense to you, the more effective it is. The more likely you're going to remember it and know what it means. So be creative. Feel free to be creative. Another factor that comes into studying is what's called overlearning. Overlearning is when you continue to study the same material even after you've mastered it once. Okay, so for example, if I had a list of 25 vocabulary terms that you needed to learn, and you start quizzing yourself over it, and all of a sudden you get to the point where you've gone through the entire list once, and you've been able to identify all 25 terms, don't stop studying. Make sure you continue, because if you stop right now and just say, hey, I'm good, and you wait until the quiz or the test, you're going to forget some. The more overlearning you can do, the more ingrained it's going to become in your brain. So continue to go over that material time and time again. Another thing that comes into play is what we commonly call chunking, kind of a funny term, or the same thing, it's known as grouping, okay? Chunking or grouping. And that's where we break down a large amount of information and put it into smaller chunks so that we can remember it easier. Just kind of an example of this would be telephone numbers. Telephone numbers are 10 digits long, but we break them down into a set of 3, and then another set of 3, and then a set of 4. And further, we know that, for example, the 317 area code, everybody around us, for the most part, has that area code. But then, like Brownsburg, usually most of the numbers start with either 852 or 858. And so we kind of, know that, okay, I know you're an 8 and I'm a 2, or vice versa. And then if you remember the last 4 digits, boom, you've got the phone number. So, those kind of things kind of help us in terms of remembering material. Try to break things down. Another method, and this is extremely effective for reading, and especially textbook reading. It's known as the SQ3R. S stands for survey, Q is question, and then there's 3 R's: read, recite, review. The idea here is that when you go to read something, the very first thing that you do is you survey what you're going to read. So by survey, I'm talking literally spend 2 minutes just flipping through the chapter to find out, okay, what am I supposed to even read about tonight? So that you have a little bit of an idea. Q, question. Make a list of questions. What do I need to know about this topic? What am I going to try and find out? Now, a lot of textbooks already have questions designed for you. So you can either look at the beginning of the chapter or the end of the chapter and just kind of read through those questions to get an idea ahead of time what you're really looking for when you read. Then, read, recite, review. Okay, so first thing you're going to do is read, but the key here is don't read the entire chapter. Read a section. Okay, read 2 or 3 pages. Okay, something like that, and then stop and recite it to yourself. In other words, kind of talk to yourself. What did I just read? What were the most important things? And then review. Okay, after you've read and you've recited time and time again throughout the chapter, well then at the very end you're going to review. And so you're going to take that list of questions that you came up with earlier, or maybe the book gave you, go through those questions and make sure that you can answer those things. That's the SQ3R. Now, I'm actually going to add a 4th R. This is my recommendation to you. I believe in what I call the SQ4R. Survey, question, read, recite, write, and review. Okay, so I would tell you, after you survey and question, then read a section, recite it to yourself, write it down. Now, don't rewrite the book. After you read 2 or 3 pages, write down in a sentence or two, what's the most important things that I need to remember? Okay? Then you go to the next 2 or 3 pages, you read it, you recite it, you write it. Then you go to the next 2 or 3 pages, read, recite, write, and continue that until you get everything done, and then you review. So that's an extremely effective method. Now, a lot of students don't like it because they think, before they ever do it, they think that it's going to take them forever. But I'm going to tell you right now, research has shown, believe it or not, this method you will get done quicker than if you just simply sit down and try and read the chapter without doing anything else. The reason is because you're much more active with this. You're going to pay attention to it. You're going to know what you're doing. You're going to retain that info so much better. When you just sit down and read, you know as well as I do, you're going to get to the 3rd, 4th, 5th page. You're going to look back and go, wait a minute, I don't even know what I'm reading. And then you're going to have to go backwards and try and read it again to really figure out what's going on. So that's just a very quick, easy way that you can improve that. Now let's talk very quickly about how do you measure how much you remember. Okay, measuring retention, and we're going to talk about R's again. 3 R's. That's recall, recognition, relearning. 3 ways you can kind of measure what you know. Recall would be when with very few clues, or what we're going to call cues down at the bottom of the page, you're able to come up with what it is. So for example, if I say, what do you know about the Civil War? Boom, you're stuck. You have to come up with everything on your own. You're given very little information. It'd be like an essay question or maybe a fill in the blank, that kind of thing where you have to pick out the knowledge from inside. Okay, you have very few clues to go by. Recognition is where I'm going to give you the correct answer. You just have to recognize which one it is. That would be like a multiple choice question. Okay, recognition tends to be a lot easier because, again, the answer is staring you in the face. You just need to recognize which one it is. Relearning is a little bit tougher. It's not as easy to explain. Let's say that. Relearning is, for example, you had U.S. history in 8th grade, and then you have it again as a junior. Well, how long it takes you to relearn that information gives us some idea about how much you remembered from 8th grade. So if we talk about the Civil War and you go, whoa, who was in the Civil War? I don't remember this at all. Then obviously you have very little retention from 8th grade. On the other hand, sometimes kids will come in and they'll start talking about various factors of the Civil War, and it's very obvious they remember quite a bit from 8th grade. Now, retrieval cues, that's the last thing we'll talk about real quick. Very important. Create as many retrieval cues as you can for the material that you're studying. A retrieval cue is like a trigger that helps you to remember whatever it is you're trying to remember, okay? So if a teacher's talking about something in class, they tend to give you an example and maybe a personal experience. So there you may have a couple cues already to retrieve that information. But try and create your own. We always tell you to relate things to yourself. So if we're talking about something in class and you say, oh my goodness, if you say, oh my goodness, that reminds me of when my Aunt Jemima did such and such, well then write that down. That's another retrieval cue that you can use to remember that particular information. If you also say, hey, my Uncle Billy Bob did such and such, that's another cue. The more cues that you have, the better you're going to remember. These are some factors that can definitely help you in terms of your studying.